ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته everyone. I hope that you are all well بإذن ta'ala. So in this lesson we're going to move on to it's a continuation, if you like, of the previous discussion in many ways, but we're going to be looking at a related topic which is called the nahi. Nahi is this word here in Arabic, and nahi basically means to prohibit something. An-nahyu. It's a word form because we're doing language or the theory of language. So it's a word form, and basically the idea here is that it's a word form that informs of a prohibited act. So remember, just to kind of remind ourselves, we're doing words, and words lead to actions. Okay, so when we talk about amr, which is a high frequency of khas, now we talk about another high frequency of khas, which is nahi. So it's a high frequency type of khas, and we've talked about khas right at the beginning of this series. Okay, and khas, if you're not aware of it, you should be, and you should look back at your notes. Okay, and it's one of the most common forms. So nahi is one of the most common forms of methods in the Sharia for delivering a form of prohibition. Prohibition means something that you can't do or you shouldn't do, for example. So amr is the opposite, of course, which is an instruction of a command. Now we're going to learn of nahi, which is an instruction of prohibition. And prohibition is applicable to two scenarios, and these scenarios constitute its types. So there's two scenarios. Now, an-nahi, just for your benefit, means prohibition, and as far as its terminology is concerned, it's to demand that an act is not performed by someone inferior. You'll see this in the discussion on the books of usul al-fiqh, and when they talk about amar and nahi, is usually someone who is superior telling someone who is inferior to do or not to do something. Okay, so the one who is superior, higher in rank, if you like, or higher, will direct the form. For example, la taf'al. They say something like "don't do this" to somebody else. Okay, and of course, just like we did with amr, nahi has a range of meanings it can cover. However, the literal haqiqa we've covered before, meaning is of prohibition or disliking, whereas other meanings are metaphorical and majaz. We'll come across this later on. But all you need to know right now is that there'll be two types of nahis or prohibitions. Number one is what's called al-nahi an al-if'al hissiya. So it's a nahi. Hissiya means things that you can sense. So actions, I'll just say actions that are sensible. Sense as in you can see it, or you can not to get too detailed, but it's things that you can observe or do. Okay, that's one type. And the second type would be what's called النهي عن التصرفات الشرعية. So we'll just say legal for now. Right, so legal acts, things that are told to us by the Sharia. So the first one, النهي عن إفعال الحسية, are prohibitions from physical acts, palpable acts, such as, just to give an example, fornication. Okay, that's something that's physical. Or wine, lying, you can see it. Oppression, you can feel it, etc. In terms of legal acts, these are kind of religious, ta'abbudi, such as prohibition of not fasting on the day of Eid, on Eid. Yeah, you can't see it, but it's a legal prohibition. or prayer at dislike times, or in riba, when you have the prohibition of exchanging 1 dirham for 2 dirhams, and the like. Okay. So just be aware that there are 2 types, and we'll go through them inshallah ta'ala. So the af'al hissiyya, the physical one, or the first one here, we mean actions that can be sensed and are tangible. So these acts are not limited to the Sharia, and they are recognized as immoral or abhorrent before the arrival of the divine law. So before the Sharia even says something, it's already known to be immoral. Fornication, for example, so the example I've given here is already immoral. You don't need religion per se to tell you that zina or fornication is a immoral act. Now, we don't want to go too much in detail, but this is tied to conversations that we have in theology or moral philosophy. So I'm just going to go on a slight tangent here, and I have some videos I have been doing on Instagram on this topic. And there's a debate that takes place amongst the theologians, the mutakallimin. And the question is something wrong because Allah says so, or is something wrong in of itself and God just informs us? 2 different things. So one is something wrong because Allah tells us it's wrong, and one is something wrong because there's something inherently wrong with it. It's ontologically, it's already wrong in of itself. Okay? Or are things wrong, and then religion comes along, or a prophet comes along, and they tell us that this is wrong? There is a debate that takes place. It's tied to this conversation around, can we know things are wrong independent of revelation, independent of religion? So that's a separate conversation, but it is tied to this. You can see how usul al-fiqh is also tied to questions around theology, philosophy, ethics in the background. This is really, really important because this will make sense. This will make your usul al-fiqh deeper, if you like. So I've talked about sensible actions. So fornication is something that is wrong even before a religion tells you it's wrong. So even today, in Western societies, it's known to be immoral. All of humanity knows it's immoral, right? It's just a corruption of society that people no longer see it that way. The second one are religious acts or legal acts, and these are dependent on the Sharia. Okay, so for example, fasting in Ramadan, for example, we wouldn't know about fasting in the month of Ramadan until Allah revealed it to us. We wouldn't know when to fast, if it's good to fast, how long to fast. So the divine law comes down and it tells us that you should fast in the month of Ramadan, for example, from this time to that time. All right, so that's just something to be aware of. There's a really rich conversation to be had on this. Okay, so let's look at the first one. An-nahi al-if'al hissiyya, is that the ruling for that one is that, for this one here, this one, is that the prohibited act or the prohibited thing is the exact thing upon which the prohibition has been issued. Therefore, it's inherently abhorrent and disliked. Okay, so this is what we call qabih li'aynihi. Let me try and translate that or put it down. It's kind of inherently wrong. Let's just use that word for now. So it's inherently wrong, not because of something else. So fornication, for example, is inherently wrong, right, in of itself, not because of some other factor. Okay, and it never become. So we call this word qabih. Let me try and remember this word. This word is actually an important word. We call it qabih. Yeah, disliked, or if you can say detestful. Qabih. That's the word that we use. Okay, so it's inherently wrong. So, for example, fornication, staying with our example, is inherently wrong. Okay, it never changes. It's not circumstantial. You can't say fornication is allowed under this circumstance and not allowed under this circumstance. It's inherently wrong. Yeah. So it can never become legal. Yes, you might find odd situations where it might be excused, so somebody might be forced to do it, or somebody might have done it out of a mistake or an error, but in of itself it's still wrong. Okay, so for example, just you give it another example, is to try and sell a free person. Selling a free person who's free, is prohibited. It's wrong. It's immoral, and you will never find a situation where that will be allowed. Okay, so it's abhorrent and disliked in of itself, and will never be permitted. So we've done the first one. Let's look at the النهي عن تصرفات الشرعية. Is that the prohibited thing is other than the act that has been prohibited. We'll go through that. So this will be a contrast between the first one and the second one. Okay. This means that the act itself is not abhorrent, so it's not abhorrent itself. Rather, it's the manner and the circumstances that are disallowed. So the circumstantial evidence will tell us that this thing is now prohibited. So, for example, let me give you an example. Fasting. Now, fasting in of itself, surely it's a good thing, right? So, li'aynihi, so we use the word ayn. Ayn doesn't mean eyes here, it means essence. So, fasting in of itself, aynihi, there's nothing wrong with fasting. In of itself, it's fine. But if you were to now say there was a prohibition to come along and you said fasting on Eid, yeah, that becomes problematic. Not because fasting is wrong, but because on Eid, that becomes qabih, so the word qabih, لغيره, because of an external factor. Ghayr means other than it. Okay. There's a Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him how to fast on a day of Eid. So can you see the difference? It's a very subtle difference, but it's a clear difference. You can sort of understand. Fornication in of itself is wrong. Fasting in of itself is fine, but it's prohibited to fast on day of Eid. Okay, because this is the day of celebration of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this, and there's always this idea when Allah gives you something, you should take it. When Allah grants you something, it's part of ibadah to take that from. So when you're traveling and you only have to pray, for example, 2 rak'at, you can do qasr, then pray 2 rak'at. Why do you need to pray 4? Allah's made it easy for you. Okay. So, and the Prophet even said this to us. The one who refuses this invitation not to fast on day of Eid, this day of celebration, has disobeyed Abu Qasim sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's disobeyed the Prophet. Okay, so he's ignoring this invitation from Allah, and this is clearly a prohibition. But fasting in of itself is fine. Fasting has been made prohibited because of the divine law, something itself, in of itself. So of course, fasting is a really good thing. So lizatihi, lizatihi in of itself, lizatihi, fasting is a very good thing. But because of something else, it's been made abhorrent. So that's the basic mechanics of nahi. That you can have nahi in two ways. One is something that in of itself is wrong, or one is that something is made prohibited because of some other reason, which a divine law tells us. Okay. So as the prohibition from the Shari'i one, this one, and Hassan Hassan lidatihi and qabili ghayrihi. So what we know here, we just want to kind of do a little equation here. We know now that when something is from the Shari'i, in of itself, its essence is good. Yeah, its essence is good. I'm going to summarize. Therefore, 3 dots. Therefore, essence is good, but other factors, if you want to use that, some circumstances, not good. Okay, and that talks about lidatihi. This is lidatihi. This is lighayrihi. That's very, very important. Okay. So our jurists have established that such a prohibition affirms the act itself. What does that mean? This means that the prohibition demands that a prohibited act itself is legal before and after the prohibition. So when it works this way and the Sharia has come, the act itself then, the essence then, although it was good, because the divine law becomes prohibited before after. Okay. Now, to understand this subtle difference, let me just take a different pen, if I may. A slight issue here. I don't know what's wrong, but interesting. Okay, let's just carry on. Okay. We might have slight difficulty here, but we'll just carry on. Okay, so I don't know what's happened. I do apologize. Oh, here we go. Okay, so we got it back. Good. Okay, so let me try and explain this a little bit better for you, inshallah. So what I was saying was that the prohibition demands that the prohibited act itself is legal before and after the prohibition. Okay. So this is important because we need to differentiate between two types of prohibition. So I'm going to take a different color pen and try my best to just make this a little bit more easy. So we have what's called nahi. We have nahi in Arabic. Let's translate as prohibition for now. You have what's called prohibition, and you have something called negation. Similar words, but actually a difference between them, and that's called nafi. Okay, so you have nahi, and then you have nafi. So for example, if you're able to do something, and then you're told to refrain from it, it will be prohibition. So able to, and you're prohibited. Right? That's called a nahi. So you're able to do something and you are told by Allah not to do it. It's called a prohibition. A nafi, as you can see, is when you're unable to do something. Unable to do. Right? This is called a nafi. So you're just not able to do it. So the difference is that in this one, let's call it A and B. In the first one, the prohibition, the nahi, one can't do it if they intend to. So you can't do it. I mean, you're prohibited from doing it, but there's a prohibition that's come down and says you can't do it. Whereas in the second one, the negation, you can't do it even if you intend to do. Okay. So furthermore, in the context of the Sharia, if an act is considered permitted, it is said that the individual is able to do it legally. And if the Sharia forbids an act, it is said that the individual is unable to do it legally. However, it might be actually possible for a person to perform it physically, even though the Sharia demands or deems it him unable to do it. So when we bear these 2 points in mind, if we say that an act within the Sharia is no longer legal after issuing a nahi, then this would imply that the individual is now legally unable to perform it in the future, even though physically he may be able to do so. Right? Now, after nahi is issued, as individuals continue unable to perform this otherwise legal act, it will mean that an-nahi is now issued for a person unable to do something. And if you want to issue a prohibition for someone who is unable to do something, is futile in that it's just like prohibiting a blind man from seeing. So for the Sharia to instruct something futile is impossible. This situation was created by considering what we call an act continually illegal after a nahi. So it's understood that after a nahi, the act is continually illegal. This one. Continually illegal after a nahi. So it is understood after a nahi, the act is continually illegal. Rather, it remains legal in itself, but it may not be you may not be able to perform it due to other circumstances. Okay. So what we see here is that this explanation highlights that when it comes to Shari'i and Hissi, we do have differences. When there is a nahi issued, if the thing is tasarruf shar'iyya, it will also remain continually forbidden. It will result in prohibiting the unable, as is explained above, like I explained right now. Whereas an issuance of a nahi upon a afal hissiyya keeps them prohibited, without resulting in impossible scenario of prohibiting the unable. This is because basically the person is always physically able to perform acts even if the Sharia has prohibited them. That's just some detail for you. You don't need to worry about it too much. I just kind of went into a little bit more. But the main point you need to know is all of this here that we spent some time explaining. Okay, so let's move on, inshallah. So we've talked about nahi, and now what we're going to do, we're going to look at some cases. Now, here's the important point, and this will help you, inshallah ta'ala. A number of cases can result from a nahi upon a matter of the Sharia being excellent in of itself, and that is only prohibited and abhorrent to another reason accordingly. We talked about this before. And when it comes to legal or Shari'i things, itself, it's good. So fasting itself is good. But because of some other factor, this is what we summarized before, some other reason or quality. So we can see this in buyu, financial transactions. We can see this in ijara. We can see it in ijara as a. I'm in a lesson. Sorry, 1 minute. I'm in a lesson. I'm in a lesson. I'm teaching. Sorry about that. So just return back to what we were saying. When it comes to a nahi that's legal, itself is good, and it's prohibited to some other quality or some other reason. We've established already. Okay, so let's look at an example. What we call bay ul fasid. So al bay. This is bay means financial contracts. Al fasid doesn't mean it's a void contract. But what we're basically saying is there's a defectiveness in it. So this is what we call a bayt or fasid, or we call it invalid transaction. Let's just call it invalid transaction to make it easy for us, inshallah. Okay, so let's go for an example, and maybe that will become, inshallah, clearer for us. If somebody sold a slave, so somebody sold a slave, this is slave, let's call him slave, and he made a condition, so it's conditional sale, yeah, that here is the seller and here is the buyer. It doesn't have to be a slave, it can be a product, but we'll just use a slave. So somebody sold a slave, so he sold the slave to him, but he made a condition that he needs to serve him for a period of time, right? This is called a bay al-fasid, because selling someone is fine, but clearly selling someone with a condition, some external factor, creates a problem, right? Let's look at another example, which is called an ijara al-fasida. So ijara fasida is similar. Ijara comes from the word, as you know, lease. Ijara al-fasida, okay, and this is an invalid lease contract, okay. So if the owner of a property, so say this is a house, and here's the owner, he rented out an accommodation on the condition, so he's renting it out to somebody, renting it to, say, this person here, and he says, well, I'm going to rent it to you, you're going to pay me money, but I want to stay in the house. Yeah. So renting is fine. You can rent out the house. You can sell something, and that's fine. But what makes it defective? So in both the cases, both of them are fine. You can do that, right? But what's happening here is you're building something else in, which makes it invalid. Can you see? Because the Prophet ﷺ forbade such a transaction. You can see how in usul al-fiqh we use hadith all the time, and we think through hadith. What's going on? What are the fuqaha doing? And what are they learning from the Prophet ﷺ? Okay, so the transactions are not prohibited. Selling itself is fine. Leasing itself is perfectly fine, my friends. No issues. So it's legal in of itself. But what's happened is something else has taken place which has caused a problem. Okay. And so this is the slide. So this is an invalid condition. Okay. So therefore, both these contracts would be deemed invalid because of some other factor. So this doesn't mean that the agreements did not take place. There was a proposal, there was an acceptance. Therefore, the transaction itself did actually take place. Right? So this implies that should there have been exchange in possession at this point, ownership of the item is transferred as the transaction did occur, and the outcome of the transaction is a transfer of ownership of one party to the other. That did happen. But what happens is the moment we know that an invalid condition is placed in, the transaction is then cancelled as it's an unlawful transaction. Right? So selling the slave to the buyer is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong in the contract itself. But the moment he puts a condition in it, it breaks. Leasing your house out to somebody is perfectly fine. But the moment you say, I'm going to lease my house to you, but I want to live in it, you're going to break the contract. Okay. So both these cases are due to external factors. Okay. So go back to our example, fasting on the day of Eid. You can see how it's consistent with hadith. These usul are consistent with Qur'an and Sunna. Fasting in of itself is good. But an external factor has come along. Fasting on a particular day, which happens to be the Eid day, is prohibited. Right? So if somebody vows, in fact, you can even say fasting on any day of Eid is legal in itself. If you made a vow to fast on the day of Eid, the vow is valid. Because it's made up of an intention to refrain from eating, drinking, and sexual relations, which are all valid. However, it's abhorrent and unlawful because the day is to be established as Allah's invitation. So fasting is fine. But when you say you want to fast on the day of Eid, and fasting on the day of Eid is not allowed because it goes against something external. So, so even the vow, someone makes a vow that I'm going to fast on the day of Eid. The vow itself is fine, but he can't fast on the day of Eid. Okay. So that is that for your benefit, inshaAllah ta'ala. I'm just thinking if I can move on to the next topic. Okay. We'll stop there, inshallah ta'ala. What I'm going to do is there's a lot more detail, and I want to cover that next week. There's a lot more detail. I don't want to rush it. We finished a bit early this week. But inshallah, next week we'll go into a bit more detail, inshallah. That's the basics. Just go through the notes. And then if you have any questions, of course, you can reach out to me. But we'll go into more detail, inshallah. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask? No questions? Okay. Let's pause there. And inshallah, I will see you the same time next week. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma bihamdika. نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.